Today we're going to be looking at the IK Multimedia ToneX pedal. I've been using it for a couple of months now, and I wanted to jump on here and share my experience so far, share some tips to get the most out of it, and help you decide if you should pick one up in 2024. So far, my experience has been great with it, so much so that I actually picked up a second ToneX pedal. I'll get more into that here in a minute, but for now, let's just start with the one. So I want to start by just talking about the features and the hardware and just kind of the ease of use for the ToneX. And so far, I've been pretty impressed with how easy it is to just sit down, plug in, and just start playing. For me, I just really value simplicity, so I like having a lot of knobs right in front of me just for some tactile response that I can bend down and change things pretty easily. But at its core, it's simple and really easy just to get started with. I will say though that the stock captures aren't my favorite. There's a whole bunch of free options you can download from ToneNet. There's others you can download for free as well. So I would definitely recommend, if you're getting started, to start with one of those free options, drag it in there, and then get started from there. But I do want to touch on a couple of settings that I found really helpful, some of which are a little bit more difficult to find. One of them is going to be the input trim. So you do need to dive into your settings a little bit to find this. It's going to be in your global settings. But before you even start messing with this, I would actually find out from whoever made the captures that you're using what they recommend as far as where your input trim should be set. Most of them that I've tried so far recommend having it at around plus 8.5. And that's generally worked pretty well with my Telecaster. So again, I'd recommend just kind of doing a little bit of research, testing that out depending on what guitar you have, and taking it from there. Next, I want to touch on the EQ controls. I love these, and I actually feel like there's a bit of a misconception out there that you shouldn't touch these depending on what capture you're using from whoever made them, that you should just keep them exactly where they're at. But these EQ controls are great, and depending on what guitar you're using, depending on what guitar that they made the capture with, there is going to be some difference there. So don't be afraid to jump in and just make some tweaks. Use your ears, really dial things in to where they sound good for your guitar, your rig, and your context. I will say that that goes for the gain as well. Depending on your guitar, I would definitely just tweak that a little bit depending on what feels good for you. But as far as the EQ goes, we've got kind of the standard bass, mids, and treble, but there are some secondary functions that are actually really helpful. I'm a big fan of the presence control as well as the depth control. Especially the depth control, because with my Telecaster just having single coils, sometimes it can just be a little bit thin. So I found that the depth control can be really helpful just to add a little bit more low end, a little bit more body to my guitar. So definitely recommend messing with that if you've got a single coil as well. I think one of my favorite things though about these controls and just kind of the user experience is when you have a preset and you start tweaking things, this LED will change from green to orange, which means things have been changed. If you want to overwrite your previous save, you totally can. But it's super handy because if you're making some changes, and let's say you don't like the changes that you've made and you just kind of want to see where things were before you started making changes, when you turn that knob back to where it was when it was saved as a preset, it'll actually turn green and visually give you some feedback to show you, hey, this is home base for you. So in case you've messed with some other presets or your knobs are just kind of all over the place, it's really nice to have some visual feedback to just remember where you have your knobs set. Now, as far as the captures go, for this ToneX, I'm using one of the free Tone Factor AC30 greenback captures, which is super, super good. I highly recommend checking it out. It's free, super high quality. For today, I'm just using the regular clean capture of the AC30. So I'm gonna go ahead and just sample it so you can hear what this sounds like. I'm gonna start clean just with my compressor on, so it's just my clean signal, and I'll start adding in some gain stages so you can hear just what it sounds like once you start adding gain into the picture. So here's what that sounds like. Now, I mentioned towards the beginning that I am using 2 of these ToneX pedals. You're probably still wondering, why do you have 2 of them? There's a few reasons for that, but it mainly comes down to the input. So one of the drawbacks with the ToneX right now is that it only has a mono input. So if you're gonna run stereo effects, you have to run the stereo effects after the amp, which I honestly can't stand. I really do not like the sound of it. I really prefer all of my effects going into the amps. So the only solution for that right now is to get a second ToneX so that you can run your stereo effects left and right into each of your ToneX pedals. It is nice too though, because then you can run 2 true stereo amps. With just one ToneX, you are limited to just 1 amp with the stereo effects after. So it really depends what you're going after. If that's not an issue for you, then you'll probably be pretty happy with just the one. But for me, I just feel like adding that second ToneX, the second amp running together, adds so much more dimension to your sound. And then especially being able to run your effects into it just sounds huge. So I'm gonna play pretty much the same thing, just some dry sounds, but let's hear what the 2 amps sound like together. I do want to mention too really quick though, if you are looking to run 2 of these, similar to other modelers out there, just be wary that the 2 can be out of phase with one another. So make sure you have some way to flip the polarity. I'm using the Daiso Plus with the polarity reverse switch on it, so it's not an issue for me, but just be wary of that. If you are looking at getting one of these, you may need some solution for that. Now, I want to talk about the software experience as well, because you can hook these up to your computer. There's a whole ToneX library. You can access your sounds and everything from there. And unfortunately, the software experience hasn't been super great for me so far, but it does seem like they are rolling out some updates and adding some quality of life fixes to things. But one of the really cool things that you can access is the ToneNet library. I would highly recommend checking this out. There's all kinds of free captures that are actually really good. And it seems like there's virtually every amp you could ever imagine, ever think of. There's captures for those on ToneNet. So it's pretty cool to be able to jump on and for free just download really any amp you're in the mood for and try it out. So that definitely is a pro. I definitely enjoy that about the software experience. The things that I've found pretty clunky though are trying to navigate your library. It's a little bit difficult once you've downloaded some captures, or maybe you've purchased some captures from somewhere else and they're saved to your computer. It's a little bit of a hassle and it's a little bit unclear as far as how to get them onto your ToneX pedal. They did just roll out a quality of life update the other week though, so at least at the time of shooting this video, it's a little bit better. It's not great, but we are moving in the right direction and hopefully they'll continue to update this and just make it even better. But just to show you really quick how to load in some captures right now, you'll basically want to connect your ToneX pedal to the ToneX software. Once you're in here, click on the librarian tab here, and then you'll see all of the captures per bank. So you'll see I've got a lot of the tone factor ones loaded in right here. But from here, you'll want to click over to My Tone Models, and you'll see all of the ones that you've dragged in down here. So from here, all you'll want to do is find the file where you've downloaded that capture, drag it here into this window, and then you'll see it pop up. So let's say I want to go ahead and add this Tone Shepherd capture, which I highly recommend checking out some of Devin's captures over at the Tone Shepherd. Super, super good. They are very, very high quality. Highly recommend them. They're awesome. But let's say we want to go ahead and drag this into our ToneX. So let me drag a little bit further down here to where I have some free options. You'll see I've actually already loaded up some of Devin's presets here, but let's say I want to add this right here into this Bank 9 preset C. All I need to do is just select this, drag it up here on top of C, click overwrite, and boom, there it is. So it is simple. It's just a little bit clunky to try to navigate some of your presets and everything, but like I said, they are adding some updates and we'll hopefully see this a lot cleaner here in the near future. Now, I do want to talk about how the ToneX holds up when it comes to being in the context of a worship service, because we love to use a lot of wet effects. We love to throw a lot of reverb, a lot of delay, a lot of overdriven signal all into these amps. So I'm always curious when I try out a new modeler just to see how it feels. How does it feel when we're throwing all of this stuff into the signal? Does it feel pretty good? How does it handle things? So far my experience with the ToneXs, honestly, it's been the best experience I've had so far with modelers. I feel like it takes drive pedals really well, but I also feel like it handles the wet effects really, really well. It feels a lot like a real amp when you're throwing all these effects into the front of the amp. It definitely crunches things up and sounds really dirty, but really awesome. I've tried some modelers in the past where they just reacted kind of weirdly when there was a lot of wet effects being thrown into them. Either it would kind of duck out or it would just smear things around. It didn't sound very pleasant. So I'm really impressed with these. So here's just what things sound like with some reverb and some delay thrown into the mix. Now, as far as the price go, they retail for about $400, but you can find them for a lot cheaper nowadays. I basically traded my 2 Iridiums for 2 ToneXs. I just waited till I could snipe some good deals. So depending on what your budget might look like, 2 of them might be a little bit much, but honestly, the value for what you get, I feel like is super good. But even if you just want to dip your toe in the water and see how you like it, how everything feels, for you and your rig, just starting with one at about $300 is a pretty low investment for what you get. But it's not perfect. We've already touched on probably my biggest gripe with it, which is the mono input. If it did have a stereo input, then one ToneX would be crazy good value for what you get. So it is a little bit annoying that you do have to buy 2 if you want to run your stereo effects. One of my other gripes that we already talked about as well is the software editor right now. It's just a little bit of a pain to navigate, and I wish that there were some more options on there and it was a little bit of a better experience. Another thing that for me at least is a little bit of a pro and a con is the compression with this unit. Like I mentioned, I came from the Strymon Iridium, so when I first plugged into the ToneX, I immediately felt some compression, which was really, really nice actually. It felt great under my fingers. It felt really easy to play in comparison. But at times I do feel like there isn't a ton of headroom. I've had to do a lot of work and be pretty careful not to add too much volume with each of my gain stages. I feel like it's in a pretty good place right now, but it's one thing I kind of always am finding myself fighting against. So that's just my experience. You might have had a different experience, but it is something to be mindful of. The big question though is if you should get a ToneX pedal, and honestly it's not for me to say. I wanted to make this video not because it's sponsored or anything. I just wanted to share my experience so far because I've just been really pleasantly surprised. But as it is with all things gear related, it's very subjective. A lot of times you just need to get it into your own hands and try it yourself with your own guitar, your own rig, your own context and style to really make a good judgment call if you like it or not. Now, maybe you love the idea of running your pedal board into 2 stereo modelers, but the ToneXs are a little bit outside of your price range. I actually have this video right up here walking through a dual Strymon Iridium rig, which I used for a long time. I absolutely love it. So it's a really, really solid option. If you want to see how that compares and stacks up against the ToneX, feel free to check that one out next, and I'll see you over there.